role with Deloitte in consulting, which was 6 months in India, and then I'd be posted abroad, and that would have been my ticket to the US. But then there was somewhere where India was calling, right? I did not want to move out of India, and I wanted to be here, do my stuff here. So I'm one of those who stayed back, right? The brain who did not drain. There were no Indian brands existing at that time. So, in fact, what I launched was India's first slim cigarette. Therefore, we put a brown colored butt, right? The CTP cock tipping paper was brown colored because that then gave the impression that, okay, even though I'm smoking something which is lesser in quantity, I'm getting a full experience. I'm getting a full, strong experience. So, then asking them.
So, cigarette as a category, when it comes to the product, it's sticky, but I guess when also it comes to the brand, that is also very sticky.
Very, very sticky, to the extent that I've heard of anecdotes where people have said that I might change my wife, but I won't change my brand.
Wow. For the previous few weeks, we have been inviting guests, and this is something that we'll continue to do. But let's also not give up on our practice of speaking to each other on a given topic, on a random topic, where we just share our views. Okay, so as we have discussed, we'll be talking about brands today. Okay, and there's a special reason why we are going to do this, and this for the viewers to know that George is someone who has worked in this space as a practitioner for a good 6 to 7 years. He has worked with brands like Godfrey Phillips, where he actually launched a pan-India brand. He has worked with BenQ in the marketing team. He has worked with Shine.com in the branding team. So he has a lot of practitioner experience. So before this podcast, I was talking to George about this, that if someone was to launch a brand today, okay, from say 0 to 100, okay, or rather if I say that from 0 to 1, just a 0 to 1 journey, what are the things that a person should know? Okay, starting from research, starting from ideation, building the narrative, the story. Once you launch, what are the matrices that you need to take care of or to look into? How do you deal with these problems? So all of the things, whatever you can in the next 1 hour, I will try to discuss this. And my role here will be more about extracting those insights and information from George. And so in this episode, it's George who's going to driving it, and I'll be just my job would be to ask questions, and maybe in between somewhere I'd share my little snippets here and there, right? So let's get started then. George, why don't you just start with about your journey overall in the different roles that you had, and then one by one we'll get into each of the experiences that we have. We'll double click on each of them, right? So over to you.
Okay, great. So, post MBA, I was lucky, right? I was one of the lucky few people who actually get to work in a marketing role straight off, right? So, this was something that I got off campus, right? I looked for something because most of the FMCG companies did not want a 5+ year experience guy in their sales or marketing team. They usually don't hire for marketing roles anyway, right? So it was basically sales, and then they look for freshers in those sort of roles. So therefore, I had to search for a job off campus, right? I had a consulting offer from campus, but then I was more keen on getting into marketing, which was more like I keep telling my students my second love, right? Because
So
my first love,
I'll just clarify one thing.
yes,
By campus, you mean IMK, IM Kozhikode.
yes, yes,
So, so
from IMCO Record. So I had consulting offers when I was there at IMK, but and these were very, very attractive offers, right? And um, there are sometimes when I think back and think of whether I should have taken up that role because, in fact, the role that I had moving out of campus was a role with Deloitte in consulting, which was 6 months in India, and then I'd be posted abroad, and that would have been my ticket to the US. But then there was somewhere where India was calling, right? I did not want to move out of India, and I wanted to be here, do my stuff here. So I'm one of those who stayed back, right? The brain who did not drain. But so therefore, I looked around for a marketing role. I was looking for core marketing roles, and luckily, very luckily, I was able to land this role with Godfrey Phillips, which is India's number two tobacco brand. It is a distant second because ITC is a clear number one. But in spite of that, as we keep hearing the quote about Avis's campaign, right? We try harder, right? We are number two, therefore we try harder, and therefore because Godfrey Phillips was number two, it used to keep trying harder. It used to keep putting in efforts at trying to bring out new brands, right? It had multiple brands which it had licensed from Philip Morris, which is the owner of Marlboro. So right now, Godfrey Phillips also markets Marlboro cigarettes in India. But other than that, Godfrey Phillips was always in that front foot when trying to introduce new brands. So when I joined at this really opportune moment where the NPD department, the new products department, had been testing. They had an idea and they had been testing on a slim cigarette, right, which was slimmer than normal, but then not so slim that it would seem effeminate, right? And they had tested all of that, and this was it had been tested in the test market, which was Pune. Pune being a metropolitan city and a smaller, manageable city, they had tested it already. And then when I came in, I joined the marketing department, not NPD.
I'll
Yes.
just interrupt one thing. I want to understand one thing that you talked about the slim cigarette, right?
Yes.
Why did they test this? I mean, was there any customer insight based on which they thought, okay, this might work? What was it
Okay.
about?
So the tobacco market happens to be something which is a very preference oriented market. People do not, once they've started with a brand, they tend to stick to that brand almost for their lifetime or until there is a life changing event, right? So maybe during college time you might smoke, and this was the thing during our uh, youth, where Will's Navy Cut used to be one of the very popular cigarettes among the youth. And then when people would get a job or they'd get married or they'd become a little more prosperous, so to say, they'd move on to a king size cigarette, right? And here, what we were planning to do was, because it was difficult to get a foothold, we had already tried with multiple king size brands, because it was very difficult to change people's perceptions or get people to change a brand in the king size once they've come into king size. We were looking for a differentiated proposition. And with all the I mean, this was the time. This was even before the 90% graphic health warning, 45%, whatever, 60% right now. I think the graphic health warning messages had started coming, right? So this was so we were launching, and we were trying to launch with a differentiated proposition at that point of time, right? And therefore, slim seemed to be something where people were able to visually identify it as being slimmer. Therefore, they were interpreting it as lesser harm, right? And what was additionally happening was that um, they did not also want a reduction in the experience of smoking, right? So therefore, we said we could have gone really slim, which would have been a very low delivery cigarette, but then people wouldn't have been happy. They would have considered it to be effeminate. Therefore, we looked at something which was medium, not too thin, and not a regular cigarette that somebody could identify as
Okay,
thick.
just a follow-up question here. You said that when it's slim, people identified with it with less harmful, right? So was there a competitor or is there a player already in the market who was trying that? I mean, how did you
Okay.
get that insight?
So the there were no Indian brands existing at that time. So in fact, what I launched was India's first slim cigarette. Right? There were imported brands like SA Lights, etc., which were much slimmer, and which is a Korean brand. And people used to consider that Korean or Japanese, I'm not sure, but people used to consider that to be a little effeminate, right? But what was a trend that had been noticed by the new products, which is what they caught on to, was that people thought of things like reducing the portion size, right? So if you want to diet, then one is that you change what you're eating, or the other thing was, if you have three rotis, have two rotis, it'll help you lose a little weight, right? So that real world observation of people trying to reduce portion size, but then not changing what they're eating, right? So if I want to eat butter chicken and roti, but I'm still conscious about my weight. I might have maybe half a portion of butter chicken and two rotis instead of having a full portion of butter chicken and four rotis, right? So that insight, that common practical insight was what drove the initial thinking, right? So therefore, how do we reduce a little? And mind you, when it is a totally automated thing like production of cigarettes, which is totally automated, here reduction of the size from the standard size meant that you needed to now have your suppliers provide you thinner filters. You needed a change in the machinery because now you had the size of the paper which was being rolled around, that also needed to be changed. So there was a whole lot of change which would have happened, which would need to happen in the production process also. So the basic insight was reduction in portion size, but I don't want to change what I'm eating. So butter chicken and roti khana hai, but I'll have slightly lesser of that. So that was the core insight. Okay, so therefore now the product had been tested and there were positive reviews about the product in the test market. And test markets are intensive markets, so there is a lot of marketing input that goes in. There's a lot of promotional input that goes in. They tested it. They found that it could stand.
Can you just double click on the testing phase of it, right? So how is
Okay.
the testing done? Who are those people? Like, can you just give some
Okay.
double click on this? What you
So
have?
tobacco has limitations as far as what you can do as far as communication etc is concerned, right? And who can you test it with? So ultimately you can if you want to launch a new product, you have to find smokers to do that, right? And in Pune, what they were doing was they were recruiting smokers. They were, I mean, so Godfrey Phillips invests a lot of money on research, right? So there was a lot of and a lot and lot of market research which was done in first in the test market, right? Because now you have a captive audience which you're looking at, and there they did multiple focus groups, qualitative interviews, in-depth interviews with consumers to find out what were their motivations, what drives them to change their brands, what drives their perceptions of satisfaction as far as a product is concerned. So after multiple rounds of research, they came up with this form factor, right? And so research also involved, because you can't just create a thin cigarette and test it with the market, right? You have to first know if there is a market for that, because now then you go on and look for I mean, get a filter which is slightly thinner. So this was 10% thinner than a normal cigarette. So now you had to get someone to create that 10% thinner product, and therefore you first ended up with a dummy cigarette. Now, when you ended up with a dummy physical copy, but then what about the tobacco inside the cigarette, right? You do multiple rounds of testing of the quality of tobacco, right? Because ultimately, whether you smoke a bidi, right, which also has tobacco within that leaf, or you smoke a king size cigarette, or you smoke a cigar, right? It is ultimately tobacco leaves which are going in there, right? Cigar has a different type of tobacco. The nicotine absorption is very different there. But then here, whether it's a BD or a king size cigarette or a premium, super premium cigarette, maybe a YSL type of cigarette or a BD, it is ultimately tobacco. And therefore, you need to understand what type of tobacco do you put in, right? So tobacco also has different qualities. So trying to identify and understand what sort of deliveries. So in in tobacco, or when you assess cigarettes, right, you look at them in terms of deliveries, which is how much of nicotine is being delivered, right, by the by when a cigarette of that length, of a king size length, is being consumed, right? So now nicotine is the good thing that a cigarette manufacturer wants. But then what are the other things which come in? There is carbon monoxide, there is tar which comes in, which are the negative aspects of it. Now you'd want to control that. But if you control all of that, then that affects the smoke quality. Right. So you would, so company would then test with multiple different types of tobacco and then arrive at standardized, maybe XYZ tobacco quality suits our customer. So you try multiple different options of various tobacco leaves to see ultimately what are people saying. So for a smoker, the tobacco quality or the smoke effect of a Marlboro is very different from the flavor that they get in a Gold Flake cigarette is very different from the flavor that they get maybe in a Benson and Hedges, very different from what they'd get in maybe a Dunhill, right? So all brands have different, but then they'd be more or less similar. Every time someone smokes a Dunhill, they get a similar sort of taste experience, right? So
Is
therefore,
it because of the nicotine? I mean, what? So my question is
it
like,
is.
when you say the premium, as cigarettes become more premium, what is the change that is actually happening? Where is the premium nature coming out of?
Okay. It is the quality of the tobacco, right? It is the
Okay.
quality of the tobacco. It is not that higher nicotine tobacco leaves would be there in premium cigarettes. But
Mm-hmm.
one fact is there, the more premium the cigarette, the more careful they are as far as the negatives are concerned, right? So in Europe, there was a norm called the 10-1-10 norm, right? Which was the maximum that a cigarette could deliver. Now I'm forgetting which one was 10, which one was 1, and which one was the other 10. But it was, I think, about 10 mg of nicotine, 1 mg of tar, and 10 mg of carbon monoxide. I'm not sure which one was which, right? Because it's been quite a long time. But then they had an upper ceiling on that. So all your deliveries needed to be below that. In India, we do not have any regulation like that, that cigarettes need to have, can deliver maximum this much of tar or nicotine or whatever. So the stronger cigarettes will have higher nicotine delivery. They'll also have very high tar delivery, right? So that those are problems, and therefore, but once you identified which tobacco is going to work for you, you have more or less similar. So it would be at that range of, so it might be a 9.8 and maybe an 8 type of cigarette, right? So but most of your cigarettes, they'll be in that range, a Six Sigma sort of difference, but then they'll be more or less in that range. To give you an analogy for a non-smoker, it is like MP atta versus normal atta, right? More or less, all the rotis that you make from an Ashirwad atta, Ashirwad's normal atta, would taste similar
Mm,
versus the rotis made from the Ashirwad MP atta would taste more or less similar versus the rotis made from Pillsbury, right? Take any
mm,
pack. After all, they are agricultural produce, but then
mm,
in that agricultural produce, you're able to identify, okay, this is the quality of wheat that I'll use to make my Ashirwad normal atta. This is
mm,
the quality of wheat that I'll use to make my Ashirwad MP atta. And Pillsbury and whoever else, Nature Fresh, will identify, okay, this is the type of wheat I'll use to make my atta.
mm,
Right? So therefore, brand differences come out there, and that is, so there is an input difference, and then there is also an imagery difference, right? Which is the imagery that the brand is able to create in your mind. Right now, it is very difficult. Earlier, it used to be much easier when above the line advertising was allowed, and you could create a lot of imagery.
mm,
Right
mm,
now, when I was when I was working in tobacco, it was still a little easier because you at least had the shop, right? Within, you could not do any mass advertising, but within the shop, you could do some sort of imagery creation, right?
mm, mm,
And
mm,
we had even tested multiple communication platforms uh, within the
mm.
within the shop. But then now that also is not allowed. You cannot even display your pack straight up, right?
Straight
You
up, yeah.
display it sideways. You don't display it straight up because the face has 60% covered with a
Mm, mm.
very gross photograph, which
Yeah,
would
yeah.
turn off any smoker who's
Yes.
coming to that.
Yeah. So continue, and then
Yeah.
I'll come.
So then
We
therefore
were talking of the
after,
testing part. We were
yes,
talking of the
yes.
testing. So I had a question
So,
here. So you were not involved in the testing part, right? It
no,
after the
no.
testing, then it came to you. So, but
Then
do you
came
have
to,
some data around that, like how many people were tested, the kind of things that they talked about?
I
Any?
think we would have done at least 10 rounds of testing before launch, right?
Okay.
Before we decided to launch All India within Pune, there was intensive testing. Would have tested, I mean, would have sampled the cigarettes to maybe 5-10,000 people.
Hmm.
And these are two smokers, right? Only two
So what do you
smokers.
do
You
in
cannot
that?
approach anyone
Anyone else,
off
right?
on the street and ask them, would you want to try the cigarette? Only a person who is coming to an outlet, and right now the rules might have changed further.
Hmm.
At that point of time, also, only a person coming to an outlet
Hmm.
asking the shopkeeper for a cigarette would you then tell him, okay, you're buying that, would you want to try my cigarette? You could not ask a person who had come to a shop and maybe was asking for a cold drink or a toffee. You could not
mm,
offer a cigarette to that person, right, for
mm.
sampling. You had to
So,
only restrict to people who are smokers.
so for example, I have been approached by a company to test their cigarette, okay, and I've tested. I
Hmm.
take a puff,
Hmm.
and so then, am I asked some questions around it, how it
Yes,
feels?
yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we so there is therefore all the marketing money that we used to get spent on promotions, which is getting someone to test, and I mean
Mm,
promotions or market research, getting
mm,
someone to smoke, and then asking the person, okay, so how was your experience? Did you like it? Did you like the feel of the cigarette? Did you notice any difference? Right, because we were
mm,
10% slimmer. It was not visibly slimmer for a person looking at it from a distance, but then when you hold it in your hand you could
mm,
feel that this was slimmer, right? So
mm,
then asking the person, did you notice it was slimmer? There were also things like most light cigarettes tend to have a white butt, right? So
mm,
that's called the
mm,
CTP, the cork tipping paper, which is the brown
mm, mm,
colored butt. But then light cigarettes tend to have a white one. If we
mm,
had put a light CTP, then people would have got impressions that this is a light cigarette, right? But
mm,
because we were conveying, so this
mm,
is like making butter chicken without butter, right? Without
mm,
adding butter. You could create that, but then we were actually looking at people who wanted to have the butter chicken but wanted to have less of butter chicken. So what therefore we put a brown colored butt, right? The
mm,
CTP
mm,
cock tipping
mm,
paper was brown colored, because that then gave the impression that okay, even though I'm smoking something which is lesser in quantity, I'm getting a full experience, I'm
mm.
getting a full strong experience. So then asking them, are,
Uh-huh.
are you feeling that, are you satisfied with this, right? पतला तो है, कम आ रहा है, but are you satisfied at the end of it? So then taking the person's responses on that, and then creating and because you were trying out variants also, right, of the tobacco inside. So you would try out with various things, and then we also, to the extent that we also did a lot of research on the pack, right?
Mm,
When you can't do advertising, then
mm,
you have the pack as a communication,
mm,
and
mm,
the
mm,
pack also is something that someone carries with a
mm,
smoker would carry with pride, right? So
mm,
now what do you feel about the pack?
mm, mm,
So, in packaging, one of the big changes that had happened with packaging was earlier you used to have packages, the cigarette packs, which had straight edges, right?
mm,
Now, straight edges give you a certain hand feel, which is not very premium. But when you have a beveled edge, right, which is that the instead of the straight edge, you have a cut on the edges,
mm.
that gives you a much better pack feel, and that
Yeah,
was what premium cigarettes went towards. So,
true, true.
you test multiple things like this.
As you're talking about, I was just thinking something, yeah. So when you take a cigarette, right, you
Mm.
essentially take it in between these two fingers, right?
Yes.
I was wondering, can there be a product or a solution just based on this input, right? So, for example, there's a premium cigarette. There's a look to it, okay, in terms of it's
Yes.
brown filter or there's a look to it, right? And you'll see many people. I mean, so when something is I mean, when there's a cigarette between two fingers or this tips, people tend to look at it, right?
True.
So, for example, if you have a cigarette in your hand, my automatically I look into your finger that you have a cigarette, right?
Mm.
Suppose there can be small, say, little glove sort of, or some cover sort of there in
Mhm.
those two fingers, just to make the color combination with the cigarette plus the fingers, okay, just to make
Mhm.
it look more attractive, okay. And I'm talking the premium part of it, right? That so because when you talk of premium, it's not just the feel; it's also about the status sort of and the
Yes.
showworthiness,
Yes.
right? It's a signaling
So,
factor. So, is there any solution around that? If anyone has thought of
uh,
that?
okay, they haven't done what you were saying, but then if you've noticed old Hollywood films, etc.,
Mhm.
girls used to have this long stick at the end of which you would attach the cigarette, and then they would hold that long stick, which was acting like a differentiator, like, and
Right.
it would show the high society people
Yeah.
using that as a thing. But
That's
the
right.
problem with that is cigarettes tend to be more raw, right? In
Mm-hmm.
the sense that men who smoke cigarettes tend to use it as as a display of machismo and things like that. And
Mhm.
therefore, for them, anything that comes um, in that experience, right?
Mm.
The feel on the hand, right? The feel on the mouth. All those cause a difference in machismo. It is almost like, um, would I would I want to drive as a macho person? Would I want to drive a bullet
Mm.
versus something which is padded around and which is less raw, right? So a
Yeah,
display of machismo also wants to take away all that and keep the action um,
right.
in
So, I mean,
focus.
you're saying that if you have those gloves sort of thing, it might take away the adjustment feeling.
Yes, yes.
There's a chance. Or maybe the alternative perhaps can be that so everyone has different skin tones, okay? And a white color cigarette may not look good in everyone's fingers based on the skin tone, I'm saying. So maybe there can be innovation around the color of the entire cigarette itself, that if you belong to this skin tone, this color matches you well
Okay,
around there.
okay.
So
So
that charge, yeah, that
that also would involve a lot of customization
yes,
in
that
an industry where
which essentially means
now
more premiumization. That's what I'm
more
saying.
premiumization, but you won't be able to extract that much value, right? Because
Ah,
for me, if I have a brand which I prefer, I mean, for a smoker, basically, if I have a brand that I would prefer, I would want it available everywhere, right? So, suppose tomorrow I do not have my light skin tone brand available at XYZ Panwala on XYZ street, right? Then I would face that dissonance and therefore not buy from there. And at that point of time, if I need that nicotine kick, I'll buy some other
no,
brand.
wait,
Huh.
no, but the very fact is that I'll not be available at a Panwala. So when I'm the moment I'm
Ah,
talking about this, I'm talking
ah,
a very premium brand. So I'll be there in select stores. My
okay.
margins will much higher, right? It's there, right? And because
Yes.
I'm going to because the idea is that again, the narrative around this would be like this will look good on you. So it's
Okay.
more about aesthetics. I'm trying to say that
So,
positioning it as part of your aesthetic because you cannot position it any other, right? So what value do you give? It's more about the
so
aesthetic part of
it
it.
is, there is also then the returns on that positioning, right? How much of a premium can you
Yeah, that's
extract, right? Because there is a limitation of how much premium you can extract, and also the fact that it is very difficult to communicate imagery in such a restricted environment, right?
mm,
To communicate that premium imagery that someone is willing to and going to invest in, because then this would require the person to purchase cartons and keep so
yeah.
that they never run out of their stock, right? Getting people to invest in India, the majority of the cigarette buying still happens in the stick form, right? It
Mm.
used to be that way, still continues, right?
Yeah.
It is only the premium people who buy packs, right?
Mm,
And there is that rarity, maybe a 0.001% purchasers who buy a carton, which
mm,
has I think 10 packs in a
mm,
carton, right? So getting someone to come to that, so you'd be actually aiming at a very small segment, and then because if that person is already very rich and has the money to afford, they might also be buying foreign brands, right? And they would
mm,
have those preferences. So someone smoking a Yves Saint Laurent
mm,
sort of cigarette, right? A YSL
mm,
cigarette.
mm,
If they, if I have that YSL sort of image, why would I buy a ITC brand which has some customization,
mm,
something that makes it premium? I would
mm,
not even think of buying the best of the ITC
mm,
cigarettes
mm,
or
mm,
the
mm,
best of the Godfrey Phillips cigarettes. We used to
mm,
have a brand called Jaisalmer, right?
mm,
Which was again a very restricted brand. It used to have imagery of royalty, of Rajasthan royalty, and all that, right? And it was a strong cigarette, and it had a dedicated following. And
mm,
for that brand, we used to have people who would buy cartons,
mm.
right? Because it was not available at all places. People who would
Yeah.
prefer that, they used to buy cartons and keep, because for them that was their symbol, right? So
Mm.
I take out a pack of Jaisalmer, which is not something that nobody else
Yeah,
around me has.
that's.
So that was premium communication.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was talking of the similar line on that, right?
Uh,
Maybe the gloves or I don't know, that's something I was thinking that there can be some innovation just because people hold it, because there's just one pattern usually, the
Okay.
people who hold it. So, and there has been no innovation as such, at least visibly,
Yes,
right?
there have been changes, not in tobacco, but then there have been changes where people go in for smokeless tobacco, which has this sort of butt, which is
Hmm.
electronic, and you put in a cigarette or thin cigarette into that, and then it generates heat and consumes that. But you have a heat generating thing which gets charged through USB, etc. Right? But then those also supply availability very restricted.
That's yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
you can do
is.
this. You can only do this innovation in a very premium category, right?
Yes,
And in a select look, I mean, distribution obviously it cannot be a mass distribution for sure,
true,
right?
true,
So and something like the Jaisalmer example that you gave, it has to be of
true.
that category. But anyway,
Yeah,
so we're in the testing phase. So we understood how testing is being done. You reach out to people, ask them these questions based on their experience, and then you analyze them and you understand whether okay, this product seemingly has a product market fit. I mean, not in terms of numbers, but you say that there's a probability that it will hit a product market fit, right? So now
yes.
it comes to the marketing team,
Marketing department.
right?
Yes,
And that's where you were there as
yes.
your there, right?
As
Okay,
the newly joined assistant brand manager,
great.
right? And
So
now
yeah.
to tell you, this sort of thing which happens at NPD is not just tobacco specific.
Hmm,
All FMCG products have an NPD. I mean, large companies
hmm.
have an NPD department which does similar things, right? Which is test market various containers, test market various formulations, test market. So in the test market, all these things are tested, right? So you create
Is it
something.
outsourced also sometimes the testing part, or is it the NPD department who usually
So
does it in a?
testing, the NPD will create and will the NPD will not be a full team which has market research
Hmm,
people who are going out, etc. All the testing is outsourced, right?
outsourced, yeah,
Nobody would
yeah,
want to have that many this thing that many people on their roles, because it is
absolutely.
not that you keep launching new products. You do launch,
True,
but then you work on them on a project basis. So you have
true, true,
external agencies who manage such things.
true. Great. So now it comes to the marketing team, right? And so what is it like? How does it come? It comes, okay, these are the results that we have. What do you receive when it comes? What is the
So
first line of communication?
what you receive is that this is the product that has been tested, right?
Okay.
This is the sort of market response that we've seen, because NPD works as a mini marketing team in that test market area, right? So they would
Right.
have actually, the NPD team would have actually spent multiple months on ground, talking to the people, getting an estimation, having launched the complete product in the market, seeing how the offtake from the shelf
Hmm,
has been in that test market. And then at the end, they come to marketing, present to
hmm,
marketing, and say, this is the product that we have, this is
hmm,
what will get launched. And this is the sort of um, sales that we are expecting, right? So if you target uh, a certain type of outlet, which might be a category type of outlet, the best of the best, there we see an offtake happening of maybe an X percent, right, or X number of
hmm,
units.
hmm,
Uh,
hmm.
Certain other type of category of outlets, you'd have we see that we've been able to capture this much of the market share. Another type of outlet, this is the sort of response we've seen. Now it is up to the marketing team to decide when I'm doing an all India launch, right?
Hmm,
So all India also could be a phased launch, right? When
hmm,
we did our all India launch, we did a phased launch where we launched first in 8 large cities
hmm.
across our markets. No, it was not even all
Which
India.
were the cities, and how did you select those?
So cities were strongholds. Godfrey Phillips anyway did not have much distribution in the east and south, right?
Okay.
So we were, and south happens to be one of the largest tobacco markets. Bangalore itself is one of the biggest tobacco markets in India. I mean, it is the biggest, and the amount of tobacco consumed in Bangalore itself is huge, right? The volumes of gold flake in Bangalore city itself could be equivalent to maybe the volumes of several companies. Um,
Is that also because of the stress levels? I mean, does it give
no,
us any
no,
correlation
it
about
was
that,
no,
or is it
it
just a
was
cultural?
nothing about stress. It was just a cultural thing. Large market and large king size market
Hmm,
versus quite a few markets like maybe Jaipur would
hmm,
have a very large number of the regular size cigarettes also getting sold. So
hmm,
it is the largest king size market. So
hmm,
Bangalore
hmm,
used to
hmm.
be the largest king size market. So we had a
What
north
do you
and
mean by
west
king size? What
concentration.
do you mean by king size
So
market?
in cigarettes, you've got cigarettes like Gold Flake Choti, which
Hmm,
is a smaller cigarette, and then you've got the king size cigarette, which is the longer cigarette,
hmm,
which is
hmm,
what you would have seen people in your SEC smoke versus people in an SEC-B type of profile, or people like I mean, I wouldn't name any profession, but then people who cannot afford that much, they go for cheaper cigarettes, which are shorter in size, and their quality is also a little lower. So Gold Flake has this where it has a chota Gold Flake and a badi Gold Flake,
hmm,
right?
hmm.
Which is the king size is referred to as a badi Gold Flake, which is what premium smokers tend to smoke, versus the choti Gold Flake, which is what is aspirational. It is still Gold Flake, but then it is a cheaper variety and smaller, and which will have lesser quality tobacco also in that. Right? So it
Okay.
is definitely a bump up from BDs and stuff. So during my time, there used to be BDs, right? There used to be these cigarettes without the filter,
Hmm,
right? So when I was in college, brands like Panama, etc., used to be
hmm,
there, which were brands
hmm,
which did not have a filter, right?
hmm,
And then you used to have small cigarettes which had a filter, small filters, small size overall, and then you'd have the king size. In fact, Will's Navy Cut used to be a brand which was between the Choti Gold Flake
hmm,
and the Vadi Gold Flake. It was a size which was in between, right?
hmm,
It used to be referred to as the mini king size. I don't know if it's
hmm,
still there or what's the status of
hmm, hmm.
that brand. Right? And
So,
in fact, this Will's Navy Cut, which was that mini king size, that used to be one of the most popular cigarettes across. It was an ITC
hmm,
brand. It was a size which was in between, and
hmm,
because of its high popularity, people, the company was not even able to change it. Right? If they were
hmm,
to make it into a king size premium cigarette,
hmm,
the existing customers would face dissonance that
hmm,
look, this is not my Navy Cut,
hmm,
right?
hmm,
And
hmm,
therefore, people would move away from the brand, and ITC could not risk that at that point of time. I don't know if they've done that. I've
hmm, hmm.
not been checking the market.
So, okay. So coming back, you said that you launched in 8 cities. Okay.
Mm,
So
mm.
now, while you made that decision to check to launch in these 8 cities, so were those the cities where you already had a very strong distribution and people
Yes,
were aware of your brand, so
yes,
that's the reason
yes.
you went for those? Okay.
So Godfrey Phillips had a strong presence in the RSFT, the regular size cigarettes, the smaller cigarettes, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the premium, there were no, we did not have many strong brands. We had one or two, but then no strong brands. So therefore, for us, even if we were strong in that market, we were strong in distribution,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we had good distribution, we had good control over the trade, but we did not have a presence in or a strong enough presence in the premium segment. This was
Right.
also our way of telling the trade that we are now bringing in premium, which should be able to stand on its feet, and therefore we will be able to give you better returns also with this. So we are bumping you also up in the profit game.
So when you talk of distribution in those cities, which are the essential outlets that you're referring to? Is it the Panwala, the retail? So which are the places that you had your
Okay.
distribution in?
So in tobacco, the entire business is distribution led in the sense that you've got distributors that you appoint, and then there are wholesalers also who buy
Hmm,
from you, and then they supply through their sales team, or wholesalers would maintain stock. The chota panwala that you see somewhere on the roadside, he goes to a wholesaler, buys cigarettes from him, and then sells it at
hmm,
his
hmm, hmm,
small outlet,
hmm,
versus the larger shops or the more premium sort of outlets would get serviced by the distributor, whose distributor salesperson used to go
hmm,
on his route, keep supplying to all these outlets which were
mm,
being supported by the distributor, and then he would supply tobacco on the way back, pick up the cash, take it
mm.
away. Right. So,
Okay.
and it is a cash-led business in
Mm,
the sense
mm,
that cash-led, there is no credit that happens in tobacco.
mm.
Tobacco is one industry where
Right.
there is zero credit.
Zero credit. Yeah.
Right? So,
Mm,
which is a very strong point, right?
mm, mm,
Most businesses fail because they end up giving credit, and then there is that credit cycle. तुम्हारे पैसे कब आएंगे? You don't know, right? So,
mm.
and there is no guarantee
But
of
even the
tomorrow.
distributors and everyone, they used to get cash before early. matlab, It's
Yes,
not a
yes,
negative
they would.
working capital.
No,
It's positive.
not at all.
Okay. Okay.
That was the beauty of the business model.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It was a cash
Okay.
first.
But some FMCG companies actually consciously carry on, I mean, conduct negative working capital, like Reckitt and
That
all
is
of that.
because it is their need. Here, it is
Yeah,
the retailer's need because the retailer has a customer need. The customer will also pay,
right.
or the customer wants it. He's going to ask for it. The retailer knows my stuff will get sold. So the retailer also does not need to think of, I don't know whether my product will get sold or not. Therefore,
Mhm.
it continues up the channel, and therefore, you
So
don't
for
need
sticky
to.
products, you're saying for sticky products, you really don't need that negative working capital,
You
right?
don't.
It's
You don't.
right,
If you're
right
offering that, you're just bringing in inefficiency into the system.
in
This
the
is highly
system.
efficient. In fact,
Right.
there was people often ask, right?
Mm,
Why are you working in such an industry? And I
mm,
also face that thing that why am I working in a negative industry like this, right?
mm, mm, mm,
And somewhere, right, the explanation that someone mentioned, which sort of made a lot of sense, was that if this is not a forced industry, right? This is
mm,
an
mm,
industry by choice, and if this industry weren't there,
mm,
the amount of income tax that all of us would need to pay, right,
mm,
would be 1.5 times more,
mm.
right? So therefore, at least in some
Because you
way,
get a
this
lot of
is
taxes from this
there
industry,
is, yes, excise,
so your
huge
personal tax goes
excise,
down. Yeah,
yes,
yeah. Now
right?
GST,
So
so that comes out. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
therefore, otherwise, think of the tax burden on the entire on all non-smokers
It's in
also.
28% bracket right now.
I don't remember. I
Okay.
don't
I mean, right now,
recall the
right now.
tax rates.
Okay.
Must be in the
Has
28%
been the
bracket.
highest. Yeah. 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 True.
And
Nice.
there are very interesting insights from this also, right?
Mm-hmm.
When every budget, right,
Hmm.
government changes the taxes
Yeah, it
applicable on
always
tobacco,
goes
right?
up. Yeah.
And but companies cannot very easily transfer
Mm.
that onto the cost, right? So
Mm.
if I am currently um, selling at, let's say, 15 rupees for a single stick, right?
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
15 rupees into, and this, I don't know if this is the current rate, but then whatever, I'm just giving you an example. 15 rupees,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm at 15 rupees, and um, so that is 300 rupees for a pack, and the government increases the tax rate by, let's say,
Mm.
10%, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what it effectively would mean is that my 15 rupee cigarette now becomes a 16.5 rupee cigarette,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But can I make that 16.5 rupee change to my pricing? It'll be difficult because since a lot of buying happens in that loose stick format,
Mm.
my retailer is not going to give 3 rupees 50 paisa change back to someone who gives a
Mm.
20 rupee note, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is going to be, he's going to anyway round it off to 17, and
Mm.
17 is also, in that also he'll start telling the person that okay, you want a loose cigarette sell for 1 rupee more, right? Because
Mm.
he's breaking bulk and therefore
But
he's
yeah.
facilitating that, he'll add 1 rupee more. Now when it comes to, let's say, 18 rupees, now 18 is also a uncomfortable situation, because now what happens is that 2 rupee change, most
Mm.
of the times when a person gives 20 rupees, he will not get 2 rupee change, he'll get two toffees,
Two topics. Yeah.
right? Or
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
chewing gums or something like that,
Right. Right.
right? And that is where all these pulls and all these brands, they got their success because they were being given off as change,
But I
right?
guess, George, someone who can buy a 18 rupee, what do you call, cigarette, I
Hmm.
guess will also be digitally enabled.
Now that is the thing. My time when I was in this
Yeah.
industry, that option did not exist,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, true, true. But now
So
that
their
that is
change
true.
at
So
that
now
time,
now
change was a
now it's
problem.
easier for a brand to increase the
Now it
prices
is
that way.
easy.
I mean, you
Now
can
it
also,
is easy.
right? How
Yes,
talk us
but
about the
also
margin. Yeah,
also
tell me, tell
remember
me.
in this. uh, when it comes to 16.5, the retailer is not going to round it off to 17. He'll anyway round it off to 18, right?
Hmm. Oh,
So when
for
you
the
buy
bulk trading.
loose, he'll
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
I'm breaking bulk, so 18 का है,
Okay.
लेना है ले लो, right? Now think of the time when it goes to a 20, you're at 20, and maybe the tax changes to 21, right?
Hmm.
I mean, there's a 5% change of tax. Now, do you want to make, would you be comfortable making your stick price 21?
21
Most
price. Yeah,
companies at that point of time actually take a hit.
yeah,
They say
yeah.
we'll absorb that tax increase, because at 21, the person might avoid. If there is a competitor at 20, he'll go for that 20, right? So
Yes.
these are again those very complex situations which are externally imposed on you, where you
Hmm.
find scope where someone who has been a regular of your brand or
Hmm.
somebody else's brand, now switching can be sort of imposed on that, is
Hmm.
externally imposed on that person, right?
Hmm.
Just for convenience. With digital payments, yes, those
That.
challenges change.
Talk us about the margin profile of this series. I know for different price point the margin will be different, but in terms of gross margin,
I don't recall. Actually,
right.
frankly, I don't recall. At that time also, I had some idea, but right now I have
Hmm.
almost no idea of.
Yeah, okay.
So I think across the channel, so the company would be making around 50%. Across the channel, another 50% would go, and which is more or less standard for most industries.
So you're saying a
And it's just a
50% gross margin for the company? That's what you're
No,
saying?
not for the company. No, no. I'm saying
Hmm.
of the cost. So cost
Okay,
would be around 50%, right?
right.
Company would keep something, and across the entire channel,
Huh.
the margin would be split. That is, 50% of the price would be split across
Okay, 50%
across the
of the
channel.
across the channel would be, but for the
Yes,
company
across the
much,
channel.
much less. Okay, okay, okay. So coming back, so you launched in 8 cities. Now, talk us there in the meeting room, the kind of
Mhm.
discussions that you had, right, when you're launching the brand. So, what are the kind of questions that you deal with? What are the kind of discussions that you have as you're going to launch the brand? So, so
Okay.
what I'm saying is that you have not yet launched there. You're going to make those decisions when you launch it. What are the narratives, the stories, the ad agencies, all of these things I'm sure is
Mhm.
going to come, right?
Yes, yes.
So, who are the people involved in those discussions in the initial days, and what are the kind of questions that you need to address? So, can you take us through that?
So initial, at least the first 6 months of the meetings, we used to always have an NPD representative, because they were sort of the parents of that brand, right? They would
Hang on,
always be
hang
there.
on.
Huh.
Are you saying that from the moment you got the test report
Hmm.
till the point of the first launch, what are the
Hmm.
duration? It was around more than 6 months? Yes.
The test report from the test market.
Yes, from the test
So
mark, you
they've
got
handed
that
it over.
to you, and to the
Yes.
point that you have now be launching it. What was the time span like?
Hardly a month.
Hardly a month.
Hardly a
Okay.
month, because with the success at the test market, there would have been a go ahead, top level go ahead from the CEO types, of saying that, okay, we now authorize production in the enhanced quantity, right? And
So
therefore,
you're saying that, yeah, so you're saying that in the NPD also, when the, in fact, the
mm,
conceptualization state of the product itself, the marketing team is anyway involved. Is it?
yes, somewhat, right, but not very deeply involved, because they'd be testing multiple ideas, right?
Hmm.
They would have been
But you said
testing
that
multiple ideas.
6 month time, that 6 month time when NPD, so what is that 6 month period?
No, no.
Which, when?
NPD would not be 6 months. It could be an year or so also. Right?
Okay.
It could, for Stella, I think they would have worked more than a year, 1.5 years. They would have put into developing the product, testing it, full scale test in the test market. And
Hmm.
then, I mean, so trials, all those, and then full scale test, run it
Hmm.
in the test market for at least 3 months, and
Hmm.
then said, okay, now we are
Hmm.
good to go.
Hmm.
Now you
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
take the baby.
Okay. 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 So coming back, so then the boardroom,
Hmm.
what are the kind of discussion that, and who are the people
So
involved in that? Yeah.
okay, so it would be definitely one person from NPD. There would be the entire marketing team, and there would be
Hmm.
the sales teams. So if we are looking at launching in a limited form in, let's say, 8 markets, then
Hmm.
it would be the sales heads of those markets, right?
Hmm.
State-wise, they would have
Hmm.
been
Hmm.
divided state-wise. So the
Hmm.
state heads for those markets would also be
Hmm.
there, and then there is that entire discussion that happens a lot of times. Um, communication in some way would have been created by NPD, right? What they
mm,
used in the test market. So you get communication more or less ready
mm,
from them. So
mm.
you also now have your own agency, and it's usually there's an overlap between what agency they use and what agency the marketing team would use. And
Mm,
then there is now formulating it for a all India thing. And when you have money, right, you can have good agencies. We used to have good agencies. We used to have
Agencies
agencies
for
with
ad,
for
ad
advertising, right, for
advertising. Yes.
communication.
Mm,
And
true.
therefore we used to even have a planner from the advertising agency, right? So if an agency has a planner dedicated to your brand, right, not dedicated to your brand, at least available for your brand, that means they are a fairly large agency, right?
Mm, mm,
And therefore we'd have a planner who is then at the ad agency, the person who is thinking for the brand, not from a communication etc
mm,
perspective, but from a
mm,
business type of perspective, right?
mm,
What
mm, mm,
strategy etc. And
mm,
therefore
mm,
the agency representatives would also be there, and then
mm,
we'd have a discussion about how the brand has done, what are the targets that we look at as far as going. So in terms of distribution, what sort of penetration are we looking at?
mm.
What type of outlets? What type of penetration and what type of outlets? Because this has to be combined with a certain communication push also. Therefore, what is the share of voice that we are looking at? Right.
Mm.
So share of voice in ATL is fairly easy to find out, right? Because you have
Can you just double click on share of voice? How is it measured? Can you just tell
share of
us that?
voice in regular FMCG would be if someone is taking out if the entire industry, right? So of maybe soaps is taking out X number of advertisements,
Yeah.
what percentage of those advertisements are our advertisements, right? So
Mm, mm,
if
mm,
everybody is taking out 10 advertisements and there are 50 companies or 50 brands there, right? So those are 50 advertisements, 500 advertisements in total. How many are how many
yours.
advertisements are we taking out, right? So
Mm, mm, mm,
there that becomes in the voice that the consumer is hearing, how much
mm.
of that voice is attributed to us.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
in tobacco it used to be different. It used to be more in terms of hoardings, which was
Mm,
the glow signs on shops, right?
mm,
And also could be in terms of branded outlets. So in an outlet which has our branding, we would also have a larger at that point of time we could even put a poster inside the outlet, right? So
mm,
does it have our poster versus does it have a, I mean, so if we are looking at the top 1,000 outlets in the city, how many
mm,
of them have our glow sign versus how many of them have a competitor glow sign? How many
mm.
of them are branded in our colors or have our poster inside? How many of uh, them have
How did you
a
get this
competitor
data?
ABCD?
How did you get all of the data,
Sales
the industry
sales team
data?
sales team or market research agency would go out get all that data.
All the
Most of the
data.
time we had the sales team give us, so it was market intelligence that they would gather, mention
Mm,
in
mm,
their sales reports and share that with marketing. Now there was also, and because nothing is fallible, right? Nothing is infallible, sorry. Every human nature would be that if I am a salesperson in some outlet and I want to be in the good books, I'll say, okay, we have 50% market share. And which
mm,
is where good companies have a rule that the brand manager cannot keep sitting on his easy chair in the head office, has
mm,
to go out into the market.
mm,
So
mm,
I mean, at least in our company, the rule
mm,
was that uh, 2 days out of the 5 days of the week, you
mm,
should be visiting the market in some form or the other,
mm,
right? And after you come back, have a formal observation of your visit,
mm, mm, mm,
which you would file and inform your seniors also that okay, this is what I've seen. I visited so many outlets, so many of them were. So there was no rigid format, but then there was reporting which was happening, right? So you were also gathering information. It was not just the sales team which was saying, okay, we have a 50% share of voice, and then you
mm,
go out into the market and you see two shops which have your posters, and there are 100 shops which don't have anything. That's not
mm,
50% share of voice,
mm, mm,
right?
mm. Right.
And then there is also pack facings, right? At that point of
So, so,
time,
so
we used
you
to have
talk
things called
about,
pack facings.
sorry, explain what back
The
facing is and then I'll come.
pack facings is your pack being displayed. right?
Display.
And therefore, for FMCG would be how much of shelf space do we have? Do we have, so if I'm Colgate, how is my product displayed, right? If I
Mm-hmm.
display my pack uh, in a cross section, right, versus
Mm-hmm.
the face up, when it is face up, people see Colgate. When it is displayed sideways, I just
Mm-hmm.
see the narrow edge of that, right? And therefore, that is no branding for me. Versus when
Mm-hmm.
I have that Colgate getting displayed, that is strong communication. The customer sees it. These are things that a person does not put so much thought into. I wouldn't say impulse purchases, but then these are not cognitive purchases, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are okay. Dekha Colgate, yaad aaya wo my toothpaste was running low. I'll pick up a pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in tobacco also, it is like what you're seeing. Acha, so this is a new brand. What is this, right? So you ask, you might be standing there smoking maybe a classic or whatever. You see a new brand. Acha, ye kya hai? And then
Mm-hmm.
the shopkeeper also, part of the promotions would also be the shopkeeper would also get an incentive for making you try a brand, right? So for every 10 packs that he buys, maybe we give him one pack, which we say that this is your incentive pack um, for free sampling. You can, someone who's smoking a different company's cigarette, you can tell them, okay, you want to try this one? पैक
Mm-hmm.
देखा इंटरेस्टिंग लगा ट्राई कर लो एंड he gets his brownie point. The guy says अच्छा मुझे free का पिला रहा है and then the customer also gets his free cigarette and the
Mm-hmm.
shopkeeper gets his brownie points and we get our trial.
So now coming back to the meeting that is, so you discuss
Mm.
all of this, how much should be our share of
Yes,
voice,
yes,
how
yes,
much should we face, all of those things you discuss. So,
all
okay,
of
can
those
you just
things.
take us to the particular parameters that you are discussing that you really keep an eye on?
So definitely would be the type of outlets that we want targeted, right? So
Absolutely.
which is, and this is there across all FMCG,
Hmm.
what penetration quality you want and what penetration percentage you want, right?
Hmm.
Which
Can
is
you
then
can
the
you just explain
distribution.
what this means, penetration quality and
Penetration
penetration
quality
percentage?
would mean what type of outlets, right? So do I want to be in the top outlets or do I
Hmm.
want to be in any outlet? Penetration percentage, if I put a penetration percentage of 50%, right,
Hmm.
then the sales team can put my pack in the bottom 50% of the shops, right?
Yeah.
Versus if I'm a king size brand which is trying to establish an image, I would
Hmm.
want to be in at least maybe 20% of the top outlets, right?
Hmm.
ताकि वहां पे तो
So
दिखूं.
so so basically, you're saying that first you decide on the penetration quality. Suppose you have decided
Yes,
that in the top outlets only will be there.
yes.
Now, if there are 100 top
You
outlets,
would
now
not
you
do that.
dis no, I'm
You
just
would not do that.
for
Huh.
understanding that. Yes, of course, it will be a mixture of it, but just to
Yes.
understand penetration quality and percentage. So suppose you have decided I'll be there in the
Huh.
top outlets, and suppose there are 100 outlets, top outlets in a city. Now you decide, okay, we'll be there in 20% of those
Yes.
top outlets. So your
Yes.
penetration quantity percentage becomes 20%,
Huh.
right?
So it is not so penetration quality would you would not talk about in terms of percentage. You'd talk about it in terms of A, B, C, D type of outlets. Which type of outlets do we want higher penetration in versus a
Aha,
B or a
yes,
C or a D, right?
right,
And
right.
then you decide about penetration percentage, which would
Yes,
be
that's what I
how
mean.
much of those outlets you would
How
want,
much of that?
what
So
sort
out
of
of 100,
percentage.
if I am going to 20, that means my penetration percentage is 20%.
Yes,
That's what.
yes,
Right. But
yes.
in your case, I'm sure you went to across multiple outlets. The top ones also.
So
The
initially,
yeah.
first phase of launch, you would not go to all. You'd try to get maximum penetration because it was king size in the A type outlets.
The top.
Once you
Hmm.
started distributing and you had some regular offtake in the top outlets, then
Hmm.
you would look at maybe now we try B and C type outlets also. D would be the last preference because
Hmm.
उसपे volume भी would be low and that is then dependent on wholesaler, right? When you have
Can you just explain what this A, B, C, D? What do you mean by
the
this?
top level
What are the
outlets
categories?
in,
Yeah. By
okay,
top level,
so
what do you mean? How do you categorize it?
would be in prime areas.
Okay.
Um, in Delhi, maybe an outlet in CP,
Hmm.
right, which has a certain number of cigarettes being sold every day, right?
Okay.
So then that becomes a top outlet versus a B category outlet might be another outlet in CP itself, maybe, right, which is
mm,
again a prime area in Delhi, but
mm,
maybe he's in some corner somewhere, therefore his volumes are lesser. And
mm,
it could also be maybe in a place like Dwarka, right,
mm,
which is not as upmarket as CP,
mm, mm,
but then
mm,
a high selling outlet, a slightly high selling outlet might be a B, might be an A here, right,
mm, mm, mm,
or might be a B actually here, right?
mm.
Because it is not CP, but it still sells a large amount. It that could be referred to as a B, right? And also you could have A's also in here where you have a large volume happening. Therefore, you'd also want you'd want distribution there. You'd also want visibility in those outlets. So it could be
Mm.
how many A type of outlets do you have your visibility in? Do you have a glow sign
Stack visibility,
in
yeah.
those outlets, right? So share of voice in those categories, share of voice in the market, share of voice in those categories, all those things would be your asks from the
Okay,
sales team, right?
from the
So
sales
this is
team.
the brand team asking the sales
Right.
team, I want this sort of visibility. I am willing to give this much of support, right? Because you
Okay.
ultimately pay for the rental for that glow sign and things like
So,
that.
so the money is going to come from the brand team as such, right? That
Yes.
you get
Brand.
us this penetration, you tell us how much money you need. This
Yes.
is what you're going to
Yes.
give to, right?
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and based on the discussion, the brand team has to get the money assigned, sanctioned from the finance, saying that
So brand team gets money sanctioned almost at the beginning of the year. Unless
okay,
for regular business, unless there is something, some new exigency which has come up, your marketing budget is assigned beginning of the year.
so
Right?
that
So
means essentially
because
the
you need
brand
to
team has
plan.
right. The brand team is essentially has to plan much ahead. Okay, these are the
Yes.
top percentage, what penetration percentage, quality, all of those things. Based on that, you get the money, and now you
Yeah.
once you get the test results, you tell the sales team, you know what, these are the numbers that you want, and these are the kind of outlets.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Any other thing that you discuss in this?
So communication, now that it had been tested in the test market, now you're
Mm,
displaying the communication to the sales team, right?
mm,
Getting their buy-in, right?
mm,
So whether they feel that this is strong enough to work in their brand, right? The
mm, mm,
communication that, so maybe Pune has a typical sort of customer crowd
mm, mm,
versus someone in uh, Jaipur or
mm,
Delhi saying
mm,
this works in West India, it won't work in North India, right?
mm, mm,
So
mm,
things like that. So maybe one could take as an hypothetical example, Jaisalmer, maybe when it was test launched, would have had good this thing in a market like Rajasthan. People would have
mm,
felt ki, yeah, this is like the Rajput type of cigarette,
mm,
and
mm,
this
mm,
is
mm.
royalty and all that, right? But
Just
then
curious,
if you were
you
to
had a
uh,
cigarette brand in the name of a city, I mean, the name of a place.
in the name of a city,
Was
yes,
there no
Jaisalmer.
copy issues with
No,
copyrights?
no,
No
at
issues with
least
that.
at that point of time. And trust me, Godfrey Phillips was one company which had a, 5, 6 member legal team sitting in the same office as us, right? So
Mm,
if there had been any issue, that would have already have been resolved. So there was
mm,
no trademark on the Jaisalmer name.
yes, okay. Okay, yeah, yeah. So,
Right.
okay,
So
so we are talking of the inside the meeting. What are the things you discuss? Now you tell the sales team that this is what you want. Now, I guess now when do you involve the agency, the ad agency there, right? Is it
So the ad agency would have been involved right from the beginning with the NPD, and
okay?
then it is, in fact, the communication is not a static communication.
Mm,
You
mm,
would have gone in with some sort of communication, and you would
mm,
already be planning the next round of communication. Okay, we launch
mm,
with X communication, but we
mm,
need to quickly follow up with some sort of communication, right?
mm,
That
mm,
okay, you've launched with a proposition, you communicate all that proposition, but then
mm,
once you've launched, do you want people to keep thinking that you're a new launch?
mm,
You should follow up a launch communication with something which says, okay, so now we've got so much of market share and things like that,
mm,
right?
mm,
So,
mm,
in fact, we followed up our launch communication with the communication which was that thank you for accepting us or something like that. We've reached X number of sales, just to show that
To
thing
whom did
that
you communicate
we
this? To the
this
consumers
was
and
to consumers saying that. So initial communication would have been was a very blue royal sort of thing, which was premiumness, and then the next round of communication, which is what posters at the shops,
what
was
were the
that thank
communication
you for
channels?
accepting us.
Right.
So
So what are the
in
communication
tobacco,
channels?
in
Yes, you have.
tobacco, it is very limited, right?
Uh-huh.
Which was that you could do posters within shops. You could
Right. That's
do
right.
everything inside the shop. My time, everything
Okay.
inside the shop was allowed, right?
Hmm.
Inside the shop or a glow sign, that much was allowed.
You can put
Now you
billboards.
have no, no billboards.
Billboards
On
also.
on the shop, you could put a 6 by 3 sort of glow sign that was allowed.
So now, okay, since everything is inside the shop, so what did
Hmm.
the ad agency do for you? Designing
Create that
those,
communication. Yes, designing and
creating
also
those.
creating
Okay.
communications. We, in fact, did extensive research in trying to find out what could we tell the people, right? So we started with a tagline which was low nicotine, high satisfaction, right?
Okay.
Which is instead of trying to tell people that this is low nicotine, low carbon monoxide, low tar, right? You obviously don't want, as a brand, you do not want to remind your customers that there is tar and carbon
Hmm.
monoxide also.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you said low nicotine to say thinner cigarette, and high satisfaction that this is a cigarette that, in spite of the low nicotine, you get happy at the end of the cigarette, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So started with that communication that stayed as a tagline, but then we we worked with the ad agency to create communication visuals around that. At that time, visuals were also allowed in tobacco, right? So
Hmm.
we
Hmm. Hmm.
created visuals around that to communicate
Any
what the brand
surrogate,
proposition was.
any surrogate
No,
advertising?
tobacco,
Nothing.
no. See, tobacco is
Alcohol
one.
is allowed, right? Alcohol is in alcohol, it's
Alcohol is
allowed.
allowed, and that's also a gray area, right? It
Uh,
is they come up with all sorts of water and stuff like that.
Video gases.
Tobacco is one industry which um, call it a villain industry, but then it is a villain that follows the rules,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Tobacco does not at all get into any sort of these sly tactics behind
Hmm.
the back sort of things. Tobacco would never get into any of that. Right.
Hmm.
We would come up with, maybe at that point of time, come up with Stellar branded cigarette cases and Stellar branded lighters and things. But then those were all things which were somewhere involved with the product, with cigarettes, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
We came up with a CD also, right? But then on that, we just used the colors. We did not put Stellar branding on that CD because that CD had nothing to do with uh, cigarettes, right? It was a
Hmm.
music CD that we were giving out. We did not even brand it with Stellar. And so
Hmm. Hmm.
tobacco is one industry which is that way very sincere, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It does not get into all this what talking about pan masala and selling zarda or whatever. Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That sort of thing does not happen in
Okay,
cigarettes.
great.
And that's also
So,
because considering the fact that the companies, who are the companies here? It's ITC, it's Godfrey Phillips, it's VST, it's GST, right? 4 5 companies who have stature, who have background, who have history, right? These
hmm,
are
hmm,
old companies which are there. They do not get into these shady sort of
hmm,
businesses.
hmm. Great. Now, now the launch is done. See, the launch is done. Now, what do you do? What are the matrices that you track? What do you do when once the launch
Mhm.
is done to
So
understand the ground pulse? Yeah.
even at that point of time, we used to have a daily report as far as production. So marketing
Okay.
would get a daily report as far as what is the production, how much is going out into the market. We used to get weekly reports in of what is the offtake that is happening, right?
Hmm,
So outlet wise, we used to get market wise, outlet wise data of what, how much has been sold
hmm,
on a weekly basis. We used to get that information. It
hmm,
was huge amount of
hmm,
information that used to come. There are
hmm.
sometimes when I feel that that sort of information,
Wow.
I mean, there was X
Hmm,
amount of insights I was able to get out of that, right? And
hmm,
the entire marketing team would sit and
hmm,
analyze that data, right?
hmm,
And right from me, who was maybe the lowest rung in the marketing hierarchy at
hmm,
that point of time, right? Marketing tends to be a short hierarchy. To my boss, who would be the brand head
hmm,
for 2 or 3 brands, the assistant, the AVP for marketing, and then the VP marketing would be the head of marketing for the entire Godfrey Phillips franchise. So 4 of us sitting with a person from the market research team. Right? So
Hmm.
we had a in-house market
At
research team also, which would outsource market research
mark.
to others. But then the
Okay.
planning of the market research was done by the market research team. Right? So we'd have the market research person also, and then we'd look at all the data,
Account
go
planner from the ad agency would have the account
from the
planner
ad
there.
agency account planner at times, but not
Hmm.
always.
Hmm.
Not for a weekly meeting, but maybe once in a month, the account planner
And
would
NPD
also
would no
come in.
more be there. After the launch, NPD is no more involved.
NPD would come in once in a while, right?
Okay.
Because for them ultimately बच्चा दिया है तुम्हें तो वो होता है,
Absolutely.
but they don't forget the बच्चा so soon, right? So they would keep coming once in a while, but then at least weekly we'd go through all the data. But what I am realizing now is that um, the training that most people get in a B school or in academia, right? Before getting into the industry, it is not enough. I mean, it was not enough. Now, with people doing data science type of courses, etc., you still have a potential possibility that you can manage that much of data. But then I would say that I was overwhelmed by the amount of data that was there.
Hmm.
And post my PhD training, the way I've now reached a sort of mindset, now I can actually make a lot more um, interpretations from that data than I would have been able to at that point of time. At that point of time, because this was coming on a regular basis, one
Hmm.
tends to get saturated and not
Hmm.
get that deep insight that one could have got.
How did you analyze data during those times? Did you use any tools, software, just basic
Excel,
this kind
Excel, Excel.
Excel observations? Okay.
It
Hmm.
used to be basically Excel.
Hmm.
So that's why pivot tables and all those, they come more or
Hmm.
less naturally.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
maybe it is because of that time that now, even now, when I need to think, I
Hmm.
think on an Excel sheet. Right?
Non-Excel
If I need
sheet.
to make a list,
Hmm.
I I am more comfortable instead of writing it down, instead of doing it on a Word file. For me, comfortable is looking at things on an Excel file. And
So one key takeaway from the discussion is that if you're into marketing, and I guess it's true for all other departments as well, but in marketing, you need to understand data, right? So
yes,
because
totally.
I see tend to see in among graduates that think that okay, we're into marketing, we'll be doing the high level thinking, right? We'll be doing strategizing and all of that, building a brand and everything, right? But the understanding that you have to get the data, when you get the data, you have to analyze, you have to understand the story that the data is telling. That realization, I think, is lacking. So this is
Yes.
something what do you
In
like to
fact,
emphasize.
in
Yeah,
fact,
yeah.
the head of marketing also, who is now taking all those strategic high-level calls,
Hmm.
even the head of marketing was someone who was going into the data, looking at the data, analyzing the
Hmm.
data, even on her own, right? She'd
Hmm.
sit on her own and look at the data, and then call you and ask, "Okay, have you looked at this trend? And
Hmm.
what is your interpretation of this?" And then you're like, "Okay, yeah, I also had noticed that. I think
Hmm.
XYZ, whatever." Or most of the time it would be, Acha, is there something like that? Let me have a look. Right? Because that person, you are handling day to day, managing the agency, managing sales team, यहाँ पे वो हो गया, वहाँ पे वो हो गया, that sort of thing. And then you haven't been able to look at the data that closely, right?
Okay,
But then
so
someone at a strategic role is
able
able
to
to
that.
do that and therefore give
Right.
you those insights.
I have two questions, and maybe with this we'll wind up here. Uh, first is George. While once the launch is done, apart from the sales figures, what are the other things that you take into account to see whether we have to calibrate or not? Okay, that's the first question. And the second question is about the insight that might have surprised you as you are looking into the data that is coming in. Okay, but first about the what are the things that you track apart from the sales figures which you think which can be calibrated here?
So sales is mostly out of our hands, or it is a lagging indicator, right?
Hmm, yeah.
Because sales ho gaya. But how are you able to control that? So we used
Hmm.
to look a lot at doing market research to
Oh,
identify, or even through when it is not formal market research, we used to also use our promotional efforts to gather information from the market, right? So
you're
if
talking
I've
this
put
after the launch, right? After the
yeah,
launch is done. Yeah,
after
yeah,
launch, when it's available there, a sales figure is something that I'm getting of just the sale that has been done, right?
mm,
But then what are consumers thinking? What are their reactions? We used to
mm,
have, at least for the first 1 year of after launch, we used to have regular on ground promotions where my
mm,
promoter was doing two things. He was allowing for trial, communicating
mm,
information about the brand because we could not do ATL, above the
mm,
line communication, mass media,
mm,
but we could use a promoter on ground telling a person who is buying a cigarette that, okay, try the cigarette, this is thinner but it doesn't look effeminate. It is a very satisfying cigarette, all those things the person could say, right? But and then the person could make the person try also. After trial, what is the person saying, right? Those are important insights for us, and we used to track that, right? How
mm,
many people said that they found the cigarette to be satisfying? How many
mm,
people found it to be too light, right?
mm,
What did the people feel like? Are people comfortable smoking it in a group, right?
mm,
Because
mm,
in a group, the way group dynamics works is that people, if you don't want to be the standout person in the group, right? If you've got a
mm,
group of friends, you don't want to
mm,
be the person who says that, okay, I'm going to start doing something different from you people, right? Which is something I noticed even in tobacco, which I noticed during my PhD research when it comes to mobile payments also, right? That people don't want to stand out from what the group is
mm,
doing, right? If everybody else is paying cash, why should I say nahi main to Paytm karunga,
mm,
right?
mm,
So
mm,
that used to come out here also. People had that. Now it was about whether the group was willing to try, right? Even
mm,
if you're sampling to a group and one person in the group says ki nahi, nahi, I won't smoke anything other than my brand, right?
mm,
Were the other people willing to try? Were the other people also towing the same line? Acha nahi chodo, we won't try,
mm,
right? So what what is the sort of acceptance of the new brand, right?
mm,
Things like that we used to track. We used to track things like recall, right? If
mm,
you were to ask, so maybe without trial, person
mm,
standing at the outlet asking
mm,
people, okay, when you think of a king size brand, what brand comes to your mind, right?
mm,
So then what all are they mentioning? You're standing at an outlet which has Stellar brand, and you ask a person which has Stellar packs, Stellar poster, all those things. You ask a person, when you think of a king size brand, what do you think of, right? And he's telling you classic, right? That means your communication is also not affecting that person,
mm,
right? So
mm,
so it would be a lot around communication, around promotions, and we used to track a lot of that. The promotion, all these on ground promotions, because they were in the market, right? Out in the
mm,
market. We'd have an agency supplying us manpower and managing this,
mm,
but then outlet selection, that used to be again in sort of combination with the sales team. The sales team would tell us which all outlets they can place
mm,
the promoter at, right? And
mm,
therefore we'd keep collecting data back from promoters, and then there again came the responsibility on the marketing team, that
mm,
you've sanctioned promotion, you've put a promoter, you've put maybe 20 promoters out there in the market, right? Sales team has placed them in some type of outlets. Now it was your responsibility that you go
mm,
out into the market and see promotion chal
mm,
raha hai, acha, so where is it? Is the promoter even standing at the outlet? या वो
mm,
साइड पे कहीं पे बैठा हुआ अपने फोन पे बात कर रहा है या what, right? So
mm,
we also needed to go out sometimes as mystery shoppers, right? And for me, it used to be a regular thing that when I'd go out into the market, I've gone to buy maybe dal atta or something from some place, or maybe I'm buying up chips from some place. I used to go to the nearby pan outlet and ask him, okay, what all brands do you have? What is this brand? Is this a new brand? And then he'd tell me, that's it's a new brand. I'd ask him, ki, "Acha, what sort of market feedback, or what are the customers saying about it? Do people buy new brands like this?" And then listen to that, get my own feel, because there are some things which the sales team will tell you. There is information that the promotion team is going to give you, but then you also need to go out and get those feedback to understand. Acha, so this is what people are saying when they
mm.
don't know you're from the brand. Because when
Right.
they know you're from the brand, they'll tell you XYZ stories.
Different things.
When they think that you're just a customer, it's different.
Right.
Go ahead.
So cigarette as a category, when it comes to the product, it's sticky, but I guess when also it comes to the brand, that is also very sticky.
very sticky,
Yeah,
to the
that's
extent that I've heard of anecdotes where people have said that I might change my wife, but I won't change my brand.
wow.
So this was I read in one of the market research reports, right, where a person states, uh,
That's that's interesting, right? It's a habit forming product. I understand that the product is sticky. That's understandable. But why do you think that people are also very stick with the brand itself? I mean, what makes the product? I understand that part, but what about the brand that people are so sticky about?
see, there is a very deep psychological tie that people have with all vices, right?
Hmm,
So
hmm.
when it comes to alcohol, also, people have their preferred brand of whiskey.
Brand,
But
yes.
even in alcohol, people are still open to trying out new brands, right?
Hmm,
But and alcohol is not consumed, the frequency of consumption, right?
hmm,
Alcohol, unless you're a alcoholic, you do not
hmm.
start drinking first thing in the morning,
True,
right?
true, true,
But
true.
then with tobacco,
You do
in
that.
fact, for a lot of smokers, that's the first thing that they do in the morning, right?
Yeah.
So it's from
The
the first thing in the morning to the last thing at
last
night,
thing in the night.
right?
Yeah. So they need to be okay. Okay. So the question that was coming back was any particular insight during that time that really surprised you, which you did not anticipate as a team,
Okay.
anything that.
So I can't recall many because there were many. I mean,
Hmm,
there were many insights and many new discoveries. It was a huge learning experience, right?
hmm,
w- Whatever said and done, I think those the initial years of your life as a marketer, they guide you very well. And for me, this was a very new, different sort of industry. Multiple things which were there. Uh, One thing that I keep saying is that what you learn in B school, right? I studied at IMK, premier institution, all that. I learned from some of the best branding faculty and things. Uh, there was, but still there are nuances, right? So there is something called the Capferer's brand prism, which
hmm,
used to be referred to as the go-to model in Godfrey
hmm,
Phillips, right?
hmm,
Which I had just studied casually as part of my branding studies, right?
hmm, hmm,
But then when I noticed it here and the way it was being followed and how insights were being derived from that, I
hmm,
learned that yes, you do learn a lot
hmm,
in your B school, but then the B school is preparing you with a mindset
hmm,
so that now you see something else being used in the market, you're able to adapt that. And that is the thing about a good education, right? And that was the eye opener for me, that even if I never paid too much attention to the Capfer's brand prism during my
hmm,
MBA, here
hmm,
when it came up, I was able to manage that, and I was able to find the actual value for
hmm,
something, right? We tend to say that okay, theoretical things that you learn in the classroom, they don't have practical application, but they do, right?
hmm,
They do have practical application. It is about understanding the nuances. It is not that a is equal to a plus b is equal to c is something that the framework is telling you, and therefore c will always be there, right? It might be different forms of c. It is about understanding and seeing what you can derive from that. And
hmm,
I found that marketing education gives you that clarity of thought. It might not give you all the frameworks, but then once you find a new framework, you'd be able to adapt to it and apply that, and it does make sense. In fact, my boss was not even an MBA,
hmm,
right?
hmm,
But he was good at what he was doing.
hmm. I guess
So,
people who are not
and he
MBA,
was one of
the
those
idea
rare
that
people.
right, but then the point is that even if you do not have an MBA, you still need to learn those concepts and pick those up
True,
along the way. So I'm sure
true,
they have read a lot of things, the literature or academy books and all. I mean, that's what it is, right? It's not important to have the degree per se, but when you have when you run a business or you conduct a business, you have to know the language of the business. So you
true.
do it through a degree or without a degree does not matter, but you need to learn, right? You learn from people. This kind of discussions are a great learning canvas for all of us, right? Books are one, observations are one, right? Yeah.
True. In fact, what I was feeling is that this conversation itself, right, it is just the surface. It is still the surface. Even
Yeah.
though we've spent
Yes.
more than an hour talking about it, it's still just the surface, right?
Yeah.
For someone who joins the industry fresh and gets into a marketing role, there
Mm,
are so many layers, layer
yeah.
after layer, that you realize over time, right? In my first year, I would not have realized even the first layer, right? And then
Mm,
slowly you seep down, and that's why variety of experience is definitely good, but
mm,
sticking around at one place gets you a lot of nuances, gets you depth, right? So while I do say that it is good to stick around at one place, I
mm,
also say that breadth of experience, right? If you stick to only one place, then the nuances that you find out are particular to that
mm,
company, right? For career growth, a marketer needs to look at multiple industries, right? Because then you bring insights from that. Otherwise,
mm,
it's like in growth, right?
mm,
You're
mm.
only growing on the data that you already know. You should get fresh
Right. So
information, fresh perspectives when you work across.
great. So George, one last question. I know I said the last question, but this truly is going to be the last question. So because we started with the thesis that
Uh,
this discussion is going to be for people who want to really build their brand from 0 to 1.
yes,
So at the end, can you, based on your experience and across, I guess, 3 companies that you've worked in, and we did not have the time to
the
get into
other
your
two.
experience at BenQ at Shine.com, but maybe at some other point in time. But more than your experience is about getting those insights about building a brand. So what are some of the things when someone is building a brand or about to build a brand, trying to build a brand, what are few of the things that you would advise them to certainly keep in mind? That's one. And in terms of what they should do, and some of the things they should surely not do, okay, while
Okay.
they're creating the brand. Some of the
So I
mistakes that
think
you think should not
one
be
of the
there.
first things that you need to realize is that you need to have a product, right? You
Yeah,
don't start with a brand, right?
right.
A brand is the result of multiple activities, right?
Correct.
You have to start with a product that has legs, right? Which is that the product should have market acceptance, it should be serving some sort of need, and then around it, when you build a story, that is when it becomes a brand, right?
Mm,
And now
right.
at the same time, one also needs to realize that if you create a product and keep it as a product, right,
Mm,
then you will not be able to derive the maximum value from it, which is you leave money on the table, right?
mm, mm.
People might buy a product X at 10 rupees, they'll buy a brand X bar, right,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
maybe 15 or 20 rupees, and therefore you're
Mm,
leaving those 5 or 10 rupees on the table just
mm,
because you did not develop it into a brand,
mm, mm,
right?
mm, mm,
So a suit, right, a
mm,
lady
mm,
suit, cloth plus stitching can be
mm,
done for around 600 700 bucks, right?
mm.
But a brand like W or Biba, etc., they're able to sell for 1,200,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
800 also. They're able to do that. Why? Because they are able to get that brand
Mm,
thinking
mm,
into the
mm,
customer's mind, and they're able to derive more value,
mm,
right?
mm, mm.
And for them, their cost, right, in the example that I gave you for getting building a suit, right, or for
Mm,
stitching a suit, your cost itself is maybe 600 rupees, and you're able to sell it at 700, versus
right.
for Biba, etc., their cost would be 200
Mm,
because they're working on scale, right?
mm, mm,
But they're able to get a value of 1,200, 1,500. Why? Because they are able to get that the brand thinking, right? And what is brand ultimately, right? A brand is across things. It is about creating value. It is about consistency, right?
mm,
And
mm,
in that consistency, your communication, your brand name, how you're projecting your brand,
mm,
those become very important, which is what most people spend the least amount of effort in. At
mm,
Godfrey Phillips, these were more or less standardized, and therefore I did not need to put too much effort. But when at BenQ and Shine, or at BenQ especially, I realized we used to have a 280-page thick book, which was the brand identity, corporate identity guidelines, right? Which were how could the brand BenQ be displayed on a white background, on a black background, on a colorful background, the logo, it was to that extent they went into that depth of saying what all can you do with it. The color of the logo, right? It is a certain white, right? It is not just any white. It is a certain white. When it is in on a white surface, then it is a certain purple hue, right? But then there is a very particular hue. If you do not do that, right, and being a little stuck up about such things, and which is, it might seem as for the advertising agency, it might seem as if the brand manager is stuck up on that shade, but it is about communicating standardization, right?
mm,
For a high technology company like BenQ, if the shade of my logo keeps changing, people are
mm,
going to say that if they do not have standardization of their logo, what sort of standardization would they have in their product? Their product
mm,
cannot afford that Six
mm,
Sigma variation also, right? But then look at their logo; it is going through all sorts of
mm,
variations.
mm,
So
mm,
communicating that is also part of that branding, right? Making sure, I mean, these are at least the first steps. Have a standardized logo, have a standardized representation of your logo. Basic thing. Even before you get into communication and everything else, at least have that, right?
mm,
Learn to
mm,
brand your product, to say that this is not just a kapra. It is, if it is a Levi's, it has a little red tag at the backside of the pocket, right?
mm.
So things like that.
And anything that you would say must, you should not, you should avoid at any cost when you're building a brand.
Uh, I would say avoid controversy, because
Mhm,
while everybody might say uh, any PR is good PR, right? Um, if you're building a brand, avoid controversy, because this is a environment where it is very easy for polarization to happen. Therefore, try to be neutral. Establish your brand. At no point is there
So
any great
are you
benefit of,
suggesting that brands should not be activists? So there's a new thing coming up called brand activism.
unless, yeah, unless you have, unless that has some sort of fit with your product, right?
Mm,
Um, I keep quoting the activism which Tata Tea shows, right?
mm,
They tell you to be a woke voter. They tell you to be a true citizen, and therefore get up and vote, take
mm,
action, do good things, right? And what is it? How is it linked to their communication? They say jago re, right?
mm.
And why do people have tea? Jagne ke
To
liye,
say
right?
no,
So
sorry.
to wake up, right? So therefore, even though tea has no role doing social communication, but it still has a connect, right?
Mm,
So
true.
therefore, Jagore and therefore social communication makes sense. But then if you have Tanishq saying, क्या है, help the poor, right,
Mm,
or
mm,
help the downtrodden, that'll seem like nonsense. I mean,
mm,
what is your role? I mean, you're selling gold at a 200% premium just because you've added your brand value. You added what do they call it? Making cost and this, that, and the other, and then you're selling gold which is anyway out of the reach of the poor people, and you're selling it at a premium and then saying ki help the downtrodden, right? There is a
mm,
miscommunication in that. So unless it matches with your profile or with your communication, don't get into it. And often there is this example cited of a brand which takes up a lot of front end, I mean, or takes up social issues on the front foot, which is Ben and Jerry's in the US,
mm,
right?
mm,
They do a lot of this social sort of communication. But then that is an ice cream brand. It is able to manage. It is not that it is taking up one issue, right? It
mm,
is on a regular basis commenting about a lot of things, which is like Amul advertising does, right? It comments about everything. It does not take any sides. It does not take a pro-government side. It does not take a leftist stand. It does not take a right-wing sort of commercial capitalist stand. It just comments on things that happen in society and makes that into an interesting conversation, right? Are you going to say that Amul is an activist brand? It is not. It
mm,
is commenting, right? And it is commenting without a bias. Now, a
mm, mm,
problem happens when a brand decides that, okay, now I want to comment on XYZ's tradition and things like that, which I feel there is that pushback. The pushback is also wrong, right? Boycotting a brand and cancel culture. I'm
mm,
totally not for that. But
mm,
then I'm saying, why give people fodder for doing
mm.
those things? Right? As a brand manager, it's your responsibility also that you don't expose your brand to nonsensical conversations, especially when conversation is so cheap.
You're right. No, no, absolutely, absolutely. So and then as I always say this, that the reason why you build brand essentially are for two reasons, primarily, if you just boil down. One is to increase your CLV, your customer lifetime value, and the other is to bring down your CAC, your customer acquisition cost. I mean, everything around is just about this, that
True.
at the in your PNL, what does it look like, right? And I mean, it's true even if you're building an affordable brand or a premium brand. Now, if you want to position yourself in premium brand, say the brand helps you in that premiumization. But even if you're building an affordable brand, these two tenets tend to be the same, that you're trying to increase your CLV and you're trying to decrease your CAC, right? Everything you do around it is essentially has to boil down that, and the very measure that is your brand is successful on is one is or not is essentially these two matrices that you look into, right?
Actually,
So
and that is what is that? That is profit, right? If your brand is
yes, yes,
successful, it'll
yes,
make profits,
it will
right?
make profits, right?
Whatever you might be communicating, if it is
Absolutely.
getting those profits, then that means it
Yeah,
is a well-established
CLV
brand.
going up, CAC going down means
True.
it's turning out a profit, right? Bottom line. Great. So, George, with this, I think we had a very good, insightful discussion on this. Hopefully, there'll be a lot of things for the listeners to take. I particularly learned a lot. So, thank you so much for sharing this experience. Any last thing that you'd like to say, and then
No,
move on?
I was just thinking that I hope there are no legal implications of what I've said. I have talked on very
No,
general terms, so I
John,
don't
general
think
terms,
there
absolutely.
should
Yes.
be any legal implications of that. And these are stories, right? And these are
Yes.
stories that I would tell in a classroom also.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, these
good
are
with
like
that.
these are very general. You did not give out any company information as such. It was just your experience and how things are usually done in an
So
industry, right? Great. Thank you so much, George. So we'll meet again. Either we meet or maybe we'll have a guest, another guest in our next episode, but certainly
yes,
we'll meet up again. Thank you so much.
great. Thank you.